This story is titled, My Parents Secretly Used My combat pay from my bank account to buy designer and expensive items for my younger sister while I was deployed, so I cut off all their services and left them with nothing. Hey everyone, my name is Marcus, and I'm 26 years old. Looking back now, I should have seen this train wreck coming from miles away, but sometimes you're too close to the situation to recognize the warning signs. This is the story of how my family's dysfunction nearly broke me, and how I learned to build the life I actually deserved. My sister Victoria is 28, just 2 years older than me, but she's been the golden child since day one. Everything about her seemed to shine in my parents' eyes. She was a straight-A student, homecoming queen, the whole 9 yards. She had this effortless way of excelling at everything she touched, while I was just average. I maintained decent grades throughout school and played basketball, but I wasn't nearly good enough to catch the attention of college scouts. I kind of floated through high school without making much of a splash, always living in the shadow of my sister's achievements. Our parents never even tried to hide their favoritism, and honestly, that might have been the most painful part. When Victoria got accepted into an Ivy League college, they threw this massive celebration party and invited everyone from the neighborhood. There were balloons, catered food, the works. It was like a wedding reception. When my acceptance letter to State College arrived, my mom just put it on the refrigerator for about a week, and that was the extent of my celebration. Don't get me wrong, they weren't abusive or anything like that. They provided all the basics I needed and kept a roof over my head. But there was always this unspoken understanding in our household where Victoria's achievements were celebrated with fanfare, and mine were simply acknowledged with a nod before everyone moved on. I wasn't bitter about it, at least not consciously. I just resigned myself to the fact that this was simply how things worked in our family. Victoria was the star, and I was the supporting character in her story. That's just the role I'd been assigned, and I played it without complaint for years. After graduating high school, I kind of drifted without much direction or purpose. I tried community college for a semester, but nothing really clicked for me academically. I worked a series of dead-end retail jobs, bouncing from one store to another, but nothing felt right or gave me any sense of fulfillment. I was basically just existing, going through the motions of adult life without any real plan or passion driving me forward. Then one day, I was driving past the military recruiting office and something just clicked. I didn't have any grand plan or dramatic moment of clarity. I just pulled into the parking lot on impulse. Maybe the military could give me the direction and structure that had been missing from my life. Maybe it was a place where I could finally find out what I was actually good at, away from the constant comparison to my perfect sister. My parents weren't exactly thrilled when I told them I'd enlisted in the military. My dad said I was throwing away my potential, which was rich coming from someone who'd never seen much potential in me to begin with. My mom worried constantly that I'd get killed overseas, though she seemed more concerned about how that would affect her than about my actual well-being. Victoria, to her credit, was actually the only one in the family who seemed to take my decisions seriously. She even made the effort to come to my basic training graduation ceremony, which meant more to me than I probably let on at the time. My parents couldn't make it to my graduation, of course. They were busy helping Victoria move into her new apartment after she landed her first real job out of college. The timing was apparently just too complicated for them to manage both events. So naturally, Victoria's needs took priority once again. I tried not to let it bother me, but standing there in my dress uniform with only my sister in the audience while other recruits had their entire families cheering for them was pretty painful. Boot camp turned out to be the first time in my life that I felt like I was genuinely good at something important. The structure and discipline suited me perfectly in ways I hadn't expected. For once in my life, I wasn't being constantly compared to my perfect sister. It was just me against the military standards, and I was not only meeting them but exceeding them in many areas. I discovered I had natural leadership abilities and physical capabilities that had never been recognized or encouraged at home. The drill sergeant saw potential in me that my own family had overlooked for years. After completing training, I got stationed at Fort Mitchell, which was only about 4 hours away from home. I figured this would be perfect, close enough that I'd be able to see my family pretty regularly and maintain those connections while building my military career. But somehow my parents were always too busy to make the trip. Over the course of 2 years, they managed to visit me maybe twice, and there was always some excuse ready. Dad's back was acting up, Mom had some important commitment at church, or the car was making weird noises that made long drives impossible. Meanwhile, they somehow found the time and energy to drive 9 hours to help Victoria move again when she got a promotion and had to relocate to a different city. I tried my best not to let their obvious favoritism bother me too much. I made good friends on base and found a new kind of family within my unit, guys who actually had my back no matter what happened. We trained together, partied together, and spent countless hours complaining about officers together. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere and that my presence actually mattered to the people around me. Then came the deployment orders that would change everything. Afghanistan, 15 months. A significant chunk of my life that would be spent in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. I remember calling my parents to tell them the news, and the conversation was about as supportive as I'd come to expect from them. Mom cried, which was something at least, but it felt more like she was mourning an inconvenience than expressing genuine concern for my safety. Dad got really quiet for a long moment, then asked if there was any way I could get out of the deployment. But here's the thing that really got to me. He wasn't asking because he was worried about my well-being or afraid something might happen to me. He was concerned that this deployment was a waste of time that would set me back from eventually going to college and pursuing a real career. Even in that moment, when I was about to head into a war zone, he was still comparing me to Victoria and her fancy degree, still treating my military service like it was some kind of extended gap year instead of meaningful work. The night before I shipped out, my parents actually drove down to the base to see me off. We had dinner at this generic chain restaurant near the gate, and the whole thing was awkward as hell. They spent most of the meal talking about Victoria's new boyfriend, some hotshot lawyer named Brandon, and how they thought he might be the one. They asked me if I was dating anyone, but when I started to answer, I could tell they weren't really listening to my response. Their minds were already elsewhere, probably planning Victoria's next life milestone celebration. As they were getting ready to leave, Mom hugged me tight and whispered in my ear, "Please come back safe." It was probably the most genuine moment we'd shared in years, and I could feel the real emotion behind those words. Dad shook my hand firmly and clapped me on the shoulder, saying, "Make us proud, son." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. Like I hadn't been trying to make them proud my entire damn life. Like their approval wasn't something I'd been desperately seeking since childhood. I shipped out the next morning with my unit, having no idea that the next 15 months would fundamentally change everything about my life and my relationship with my family. I certainly had no clue about the betrayal that was waiting for me when I returned. Afghanistan was, well, if you know, you know. And if you don't, no amount of explaining will make you truly understand what it's like. The heat was absolutely brutal. Imagine stepping into an oven that never turns off. The dust got into everything. Your gear, your food, your lungs, places on your body you didn't even know existed. There was this constant tension of not knowing if today would be the day you stepped on the wrong patch of dirt, the day your luck ran out. Every single day brought the very real possibility that you might not make it home. The physical demands were beyond anything I'd experienced, even in basic training. We were carrying 85 pounds of gear in temperatures that regularly hit 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The sweat would soak through every single layer of clothing we wore, and the sand found its way into places that made simple tasks like eating or sleeping uncomfortable. But somehow, despite all of this, or maybe because of it, I found myself thriving in ways I never had before. I wrote home every week for the first few months. Actual physical letters in the old-school style. There was something therapeutic about putting pen to paper and trying to share pieces of my experience with the people back home. Mom would write back occasionally with updates about life in their small town, but Dad never did. Their letters always followed the same pattern. Brief acknowledgments of what I'd shared, followed by long, detailed updates about Victoria's life. Victoria got engaged to Brandon. Victoria and Brandon bought a house together. Victoria got another promotion at work. Reading their letters was like subscribing to a newsletter about my sister's accomplishments, with my own experiences as a deployed soldier serving as barely relevant footnotes. 7 months into our deployment, our unit experienced its first casualty, and it hit all of us like a truck. He was a really good dude from Oklahoma who always carried pictures of his wife and baby girl in his chest pocket. He'd show them to anyone who'd listen, talking about how his daughter was learning to walk and say new words. He was on point during a routine patrol in a village when he went into a building to clear it. That was it. He was gone in an instant. No dramatic final words or heroic last stand. Just there one moment and gone the next, leaving behind a wife and a little girl who would grow up without her father. I wrote home about losing him, not going into the graphic details, but explaining that we'd lost someone close to our unit and that it was hitting me harder than I'd expected. The reality of mortality in a combat zone had suddenly become very real and personal. Mom's return letter barely acknowledged what I'd shared. She wrote, "That's terrible, honey." and then immediately launched into a 6-page detailed description of Victoria's engagement party, complete with descriptions of the flowers, the guest list, and what everyone wore. After receiving that letter, I stopped writing home so frequently. The disconnect between what I was experiencing and what my family cared about became too painful to ignore. Instead, I started focusing more on living in the present with the guys around me who actually gave a damn, whether I lived or died. My squad became my real family. The people who understood the weight of what we were going through together, who had each other's backs when everything went to hell. For Christmas, my parents sent me a care package that perfectly encapsulated how little they understood about my life or needs. Half the stuff was things I couldn't use in a combat environment or items I had specifically told them I didn't need in previous letters. The other half was obviously re-gifted junk from around their house. Old books I'd never expressed interest in, expired snacks, and random household items that served no purpose in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, some of the other guys in my unit were receiving these incredible, thoughtful care packages from their families back home. Homemade cookies that somehow survived the shipping process, their favorite snacks from childhood, new socks, which are like gold in a deployment, and handwritten letters from every single member of their family, including grandparents, cousins, and family friends. About a month later, I received another package that was completely different from anything my parents had sent. This one actually contained stuff I genuinely wanted and could use. There was high-quality beef jerky, my favorite candy that I'd mentioned in passing months earlier, new earbuds to replace the ones that had broken, and a paperback novel by my favorite author. I was genuinely confused about who could have sent something so thoughtful until I read the accompanying note. It wasn't from my parents at all. The package was from Lily, who was Brandon's sister, my sister's fiance's sister. We'd only met a couple of times before I deployed, brief interactions at family gatherings, but apparently she had been paying attention to details about me that my own parents had completely missed or ignored. Her note was simple but meant everything. Just wanted you to have some comforts from home. Brandon mentioned your parents hadn't sent much, so I put this together. Stay safe out there. That single care package from someone who was barely more than a stranger meant more to me than anything my own family had done for me in years. As we approached the final month of deployment, the anticipation of going home started building throughout our unit. Guys were constantly talking about what they planned to do first when they got back, who they were most excited to see, and how they were going to spend their first few days of freedom. Most of them had wives, girlfriends, children, or extended families waiting eagerly for their return. They'd show pictures and read letters aloud, sharing their excitement about reunions that had been 15 months in the making. I had my parents in Victoria. It wasn't exactly the homecoming of my dreams, but they were still family, and that had to count for something, right? I tried to convince myself that despite all the disappointments and emotional distance, they would step up when it really mattered. Surely they wouldn't miss something as important as their son returning from a war zone. Our command was incredibly organized about the entire homecoming process, understanding how important this moment would be for both the soldiers and their families. They sent detailed paperwork to all of our families weeks in advance, containing every piece of information they could possibly need. The date, the exact time, the location, parking instructions, what to expect during the ceremony. Everything was spelled out clearly in official military correspondence. They even made follow-up phone calls to ensure that families had received all the information and understood the logistics. This wasn't some casual event that people might accidentally miss due to confusion or miscommunication. The ceremony was scheduled for June 22nd at 1500 hours, 3 p.m. for civilians, at the main hangar on Fort Mitchell. Everything was planned down to the minute, with military precision that left no room for error or misunderstanding. A few days before we left the country, I managed to get access to a satellite phone and called home to touch base one final time before the long journey back. Mom answered the phone, and I told her with genuine excitement that I'd see them soon at the ceremony. She sounded distracted, like she was multitasking or had her mind on something else entirely. She said something vague about checking the calendar and assured me they'd be there when the time came. I figured everything was set and that my family would finally be there for one of the most important moments of my military career. Looking back now, I had absolutely no idea what was actually waiting for me. The flight back to the States felt like it took forever, even though we were all desperate to get home. We stopped in Germany for refueling and processing, then endured this seemingly endless flight across the Atlantic to the East Coast. The guys were completely wired with anticipation and excitement, unable to sleep despite their exhaustion. Everyone was passing around phone pictures of their kids, wives, and girlfriends, making detailed plans for what they wanted to do first when they finally got home. Some talked about elaborate dinners their families had planned, others about quiet moments they'd been dreaming about for months. I kept quiet during most of these conversations, just staring out the airplane window watching the vast ocean pass underneath us. 15 months of sand, heat, danger, and death were finally behind me, but I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. I wasn't expecting some kind of hero's welcome or anything overly dramatic. I just wanted someone to be there. Someone who cared enough to show up and say, "Welcome home. We're proud of you. We're glad you made it back safely." When we finally landed on American soil, they held us in this processing area for what felt like hours. There was the usual military bureaucracy, paperwork to complete, gear checks to ensure everything was accounted for, and the standard hurry up and wait routine that every soldier knows by heart. But underneath all that routine, there was this electric energy of anticipation. We could hear the crowd gathering on the other side of the big hangar doors. Hundreds of people waiting, American flags waving in the air, children squealing with excitement, and the general buzz of families who had been counting down the days until this moment. Eventually, they lined us up alphabetically by last name, and the sound from the other side of those doors grew louder and more excited. I could hear signs being rustled, people calling out names, and the kind of joyful chaos that comes with long-awaited reunions. The energy was infectious, and despite my earlier concerns, I found myself getting caught up in the excitement. Maybe my family really would be there. Maybe this time would be different. The doors finally opened with a dramatic flourish, and the ceremony officially began. It was a real dog and pony show, complete with speeches from various officers thanking us for our service, expressions of gratitude from local politicians who wanted to be seen supporting the troops, and all the standard patriotic ceremony that the military does so well. The crowd was huge, easily several hundred people packed into that hangar, all waiting for their specific soldier to be called. Then they started calling names, and the real emotion began. The first guy ahead of me in line heard his name announced over the loudspeaker, and immediately his wife and two little girls came running toward him like their lives depended on it. The girls wrapped around his legs like little koalas, refusing to let go, while his wife threw her arms around his neck and sobbed with relief. The entire crowd erupted in cheers and applause, celebrating this family's reunion with genuine joy. The next soldier's name was called, and his entire extended family rushed forward. What looked like about 20 people wearing matching t-shirts with his picture on them and "Welcome Home" printed in bold letters. More cheers, more clapping, more tears of joy. Then came more names, each one followed by these incredible reunions that you see in movies, but somehow mean so much more when you're witnessing them in person. Each soldier walked out into a sea of hugs, tears, kisses, and heartfelt expressions of gratitude. Then they called my name and rank over the loudspeaker. I straightened my uniform, took a deep breath to steady my nerves, and walked out into the bright lights of the hangar with my head held high. And then, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not a single person moved forward from the crowd. No one called my name or waved in recognition. Not one familiar face anywhere in that sea of people. The silence was absolutely deafening, made even worse by the contrast with all the celebration that had come before. You could almost feel the pity radiating from the other families in the crowd. Some people looked away, clearly embarrassed for me and uncomfortable witnessing such a painfully awkward moment. Others whispered to each other, probably wondering where my people were and why no one had come for me. The commanding officer, who had been smiling warmly and shaking hands with each returning soldier as they reunited with their families, gave me this look that said absolutely everything without words. It was a mixture of sympathy, disappointment, and professional obligation to keep the ceremony moving. His expression clearly communicated, "Sorry, son, but you need to move along." I walked across that enormous hangar floor completely alone, my military boots echoing loudly on the concrete with each step. The sound seemed to reverberate through the entire space, emphasizing just how isolated I was in that moment. Behind me, the next name was immediately called, and the crowd erupted in cheers and celebration once again as if nothing had happened. As if there hadn't just been this gaping black hole of silence and abandonment when they called my name. I stood off to the side, trying to make myself invisible while watching family after family experience these incredible reunions. Children were jumping into their father's arms with squeals of delight. Wives were kissing husbands they hadn't seen in over a year, tears streaming down their faces. Parents were hugging their sons and daughters, holding them tight as if they never wanted to let them go again. All around me was this explosion of love, Relief, gratitude, and pure joy at being reunited after such a long and dangerous separation. And there I was, standing alone in the middle of what should have been one of the happiest moments of my life, surrounded by all this love and celebration that I wasn't part of. It was like being invisible at my own homecoming. A couple of the other soldiers' mothers noticed me standing by myself and came over with genuine concern in their eyes. "Are you okay, honey? Is someone coming for you?" one of them asked. Her voice filled with the kind of maternal warmth I hadn't experienced in years. I mumbled something about my family probably being stuck in traffic or running late, but we all knew the truth. No one was coming for me. These kind women could see right through my weak excuse, but they were too polite to call me out on it. As the hangar gradually emptied out and families headed home for private celebrations and intimate reunions, I found myself sitting on this cold metal bench outside the base gate. Just me, my army duffel bag, and a single suitcase containing everything I owned after 15 months overseas. The sun was starting to set, and the temperature was dropping, making the evening feel even more lonely and desolate. Still no phone call. My phone had gotten busted during our last week in country when we took some incoming fire, and I'd figured I would just get a new one when I got home. I'd assumed my family would be there to pick me up, so communication hadn't seemed like an urgent priority. So I sat there under this flickering streetlight, watching car after car drive away from the base. Families were heading home together, probably planning to continue their celebrations with home-cooked meals, catching up on everything that had happened during the deployment, and just enjoying being together again. I watched the parking lot slowly empty as the sun disappeared completely, and darkness settled over everything. I don't know exactly how long I sat there on that bench. Long enough for the buses to stop running their regular routes. Long enough for the street to go completely quiet except for the occasional passing car. Long enough for the reality to fully sink in that absolutely no one was coming for me. I'd survived firefights, improvised explosive devices, and 15 months in a war zone, only to come home to the most painful welcome I could have imagined. Complete abandonment by the people who were supposed to care about me most. One of my squad mates from the unit eventually drove by with his parents, who had stayed late to take pictures and continue celebrating at a nearby restaurant. They had been out having dinner and sharing stories when they spotted me still sitting there under that streetlight like some kind of forgotten piece of luggage. "Hayes, what the hell, man? You're still here?" he called out, genuinely shocked to see me in the same spot hours after the ceremony had ended. His parents immediately insisted they give me a ride, despite the fact that they'd never met me before and had no obligation to help. His mom was the kind of person who couldn't stand to see someone in need, and she wouldn't take no for an answer. They drove me to this cheap motel about 3 miles from the base, one of those rundown places that rents rooms by the week to people who don't have many other options. His dad discreetly slipped me $50 when he thought I wasn't looking, pressing the bills into my hand with the kind of quiet dignity that made it clear this wasn't charity, just one person helping another who was going through a rough time. That night in that depressing motel room with its buzzing fluorescent lights and paper-thin walls, I lay on the lumpy bed still wearing my dress uniform from the ceremony. I didn't even have the energy to change clothes or unpack my bags. I just stared at the water-stained ceiling and let the full weight of what had happened finally sink in. I had made it through a war zone, survived everything Afghanistan could throw at me, only to discover that I didn't have anyone waiting for me on the other side. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had found something more important to do on the day their son came home from war. But maybe they had an emergency and couldn't come. Maybe something terrible had happened that prevented them from being there. My mind was racing with all the possibilities, trying to come up with some reasonable explanation for why my entire family had missed the most important day of my military career. Maybe there had been a car accident or a medical emergency or some kind of family crisis that had made it impossible for them to attend. I spent most of that sleepless night convincing myself that there had to be a logical reason that my family wouldn't deliberately choose to miss my homecoming. The next morning, I took a taxi to my parents' house, still wearing my dress uniform from the previous day because everything else was packed away in my duffel bag and I hadn't slept more than maybe an hour. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and still trying to process the events of the previous day. I kept replaying that silent walk across the hangar floor in my head, the sound of my boots echoing in the sudden quiet after my name was called. I rang the doorbell and my mom answered the door. Her face went through this rapid transformation, from confusion at seeing someone at the door, to shock when she realized it was me standing there in my military dress uniform. "Marcus, oh my God, you're home. We weren't expecting you until next week," she said, her voice filled with what seemed like genuine surprise. I just stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what she had just said. Mom, the unit sent you official paperwork 3 weeks ago with the exact date and time of the ceremony. It was all spelled out in detail. She immediately started stammering about how they must have gotten confused somehow, how they'd been so incredibly busy lately with various commitments, and how things had been absolutely crazy around the house recently. Then I heard my sister Victoria's voice from inside the house calling out, "Mom, who is it?" A moment later, Victoria appeared in the doorway behind my mother, walking very carefully like she was in significant pain or discomfort. She was wearing some kind of compression garment that was visible under her clothes, and she moved like someone who had recently undergone some kind of medical procedure. My dad showed up behind both of them, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. The expression on his face was a mixture of guilt, shock, and something that looked almost like fear. All three of them were staring at me like I was the last person on earth they expected to see on their doorstep. "You weren't there yesterday because of her, weren't you?" I said, the pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicking together in my mind. The timing, Victoria's obvious recent medical procedure, the way they were all looking at me. It was starting to make horrible sense. My dad tried to step in and explain the situation, his voice taking on that defensive tone I'd heard so many times when he was trying to justify prioritizing Victoria over me. "Marcus, your sister needed us yesterday. She had an important medical procedure, and she required our support during a difficult time." "And what kind of medical procedure was so incredibly important that you missed your son coming home from a war zone?" I asked, my voice getting louder as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. I could feel 15 months of suppressed anger and disappointment building up inside me. Victoria had the absolute nerve to roll her eyes at my question, like I was being unreasonable for expecting my family to prioritize my homecoming over whatever she had going on. It was cosmetic surgery, if you absolutely must know. And I needed someone there to take care of me because Brandon completely refused to support me or take me to the procedure. Cosmetic surgery, I repeated the words slowly, letting them sink in and making sure I had heard her correctly. My welcome home ceremony after 15 months in Afghanistan, and you all missed it for cosmetic surgery. The absurdity of it was almost too much to comprehend. I had been dodging bullets and IEDs while my sister was planning her body modifications. "We're so sorry, honey," my mom said, reaching out to try to touch my arm in what I suppose was meant to be a comforting gesture. I immediately pulled away from her, not wanting any physical contact that might soften my resolve. But she really needed our support during this time. Brandon has been so difficult lately about the whole thing, and she was going through it alone. I cut her off before she could continue with more excuses. "I'm staying at the Sunset Motel on Route 18. I'll be back tomorrow to get the rest of my stuff from the storage unit." I had kept a small storage unit with some personal belongings that didn't fit in my deployment bags. As I turned to leave their house, probably for the last time, Victoria called after me with the kind of dismissive attitude that had characterized our entire relationship. "Don't be so dramatic about this, Marcus. It's not like you even told us the right date anyway." I didn't look back or respond to her comment, just kept walking while they continued making weak excuses behind me. But her words stuck with me as I walked back toward the main road. Something about that comment didn't sit right. The military doesn't just casually text deployment schedules or leave important dates up to interpretation. There are official papers, multiple follow-up calls, emails, and confirmation procedures. It's not like ordering a pizza where the delivery time might change at the last minute. It wasn't until later that night that I would find out the whole truth about what had really happened. And as bad as I thought the situation was at that moment, it was actually so much worse than I could have imagined. As I walked back to the motel, my mind was absolutely racing with questions and doubts. How could they miss something as monumentally important as their son coming home from a war zone for cosmetic surgery? Really? And what was that pointed comment Victoria made about me not telling them the right date? The military doesn't just casually handle deployment schedules like some kind of informal social event. There are official papers with letterheads, follow-up phone calls from military personnel, confirmation emails, and multiple verification procedures. This isn't like ordering a pizza where the delivery time might change at the last minute due to traffic or kitchen delays. Something fundamental wasn't adding up about their story. The more I thought about their explanations and excuses, the less sense any of it made. Every detail seemed designed to deflect responsibility rather than provide a genuine account of what had happened. I was still staying at that depressing motel when someone knocked on my door later that evening. It was Lily, the same person who had sent me that thoughtful care package during my deployment. The one that had actually contained things I wanted and needed. "Can I come in?" she asked. And something about her expression told me this wasn't a social visit. I led her into the small room, and she immediately handed me a cell phone. "Brandon wanted you to have this. He figured you might need it after everything that happened yesterday." Brandon and I weren't particularly close or anything like that, but we had always gotten along well during family gatherings. I thanked her for the phone and started setting it up, grateful to finally have a way to communicate with the outside world again. That's when Lily dropped the first bomb that would completely shatter my understanding of what had happened. "There's something else you should know," she said, looking extremely uncomfortable and fidgeting with her hands. "It's about the money for Victoria's surgery. It turns out that my sister hadn't just used my parents as her support system for her ridiculous cosmetic procedure. She had somehow managed to get access to my money as well. Money that I had earned while deployed in a combat zone. Money that was supposed to be my financial foundation for starting my civilian life. Before I deployed to Afghanistan, I had set up a special savings account where a significant portion of my combat pay would automatically be deposited. The military offers additional compensation for soldiers serving in combat zones, and I wanted to make sure I was building up my savings for when I returned. I had given my parents access to this account, but strictly for emergency purposes only, like if something catastrophic happened to me and they needed to handle my affairs or cover unexpected expenses related to my deployment. Lily pulled out her phone and showed me bank statements that made my blood run cold. 3 major withdrawals totaling $9,400, all made exactly 3 weeks ago, right around the time my sister had decided she needed her new body and couldn't wait for her husband to support the decision. I stared at the screen in complete disbelief, trying to process what I was seeing. With the spotty internet connection at our remote outpost during the final weeks of deployment, and with all my bank statements being sent to my parents' house instead of to me directly, I'd had absolutely no way of knowing what was happening to my accounts back home. I had trusted my family to respect the boundaries I'd established, and only use that access in case of a genuine emergency. "Brandon found out about this yesterday," Lily explained, her voice filled with disgust at what had happened. "That's exactly why he didn't go with her to the surgery. He completely refused to support it when he discovered she had taken your money without permission." She paused, letting that information sink in. "They've been fighting about it constantly for the past several days. He's absolutely furious about what she did." I felt physically sick as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. Not only had my entire family missed my homecoming ceremony to support Victoria's cosmetic surgery, but she had actually stolen from me to pay for the procedure. She had taken money that I had earned while being shot at in Afghanistan to fund her vanity project. "There's more," Lily continued, "and I couldn't imagine how this situation could possibly get any worse. Victoria told your parents that you weren't coming home for another 3 weeks. She showed them fake papers with a completely different date. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, creating a picture that was more calculated and malicious than I had initially realized. I think she knew they would never choose her surgery over your homecoming if they knew the real date," Lily explained. "So she deliberately lied to them about when you were returning to ensure they would be available to support her instead." Everything suddenly clicked into place with devastating clarity. My sister had deliberately deceived our parents about my homecoming date, so they would prioritize her cosmetic surgery over my return from a war zone. She had known exactly what she was doing, manipulating the situation to ensure she would get the attention and support she wanted while leaving me to face an empty homecoming ceremony alone. I thanked Lily for having the courage to tell me the truth, knowing it couldn't have been easy for her to get involved in our family drama. After she left, I immediately pulled up my bank account information on the new phone Brandon had provided. Sure enough, the money was gone, just as Lily had shown me. But as I scrolled through the transaction history, I discovered there were other unauthorized withdrawals as well. Smaller ones going back several months that I hadn't been aware of. Hundreds of dollars here and there, totaling another couple of $1,000s over time. I wasn't just betrayed by my family's absence at my homecoming. I had been systematically robbed by my own blood while I was serving my country in a combat zone. The next morning, I went straight to my bank as soon as they opened for business. I needed to understand exactly what had happened and what my options were for recovering the money that had been stolen from me. The banker's face changed dramatically as she scrolled through my account history on her computer screen, her professional composure giving way to obvious concern and disbelief. "This doesn't look right at all," she said carefully, clearly trying to maintain her professional demeanor while processing what she was seeing. "These withdrawals were made while you were deployed overseas, correct?" When I confirmed that yes, I had been in Afghanistan during all of those transactions, she pulled up the signature cards on file and compared them to samples of my actual signature. She shook her head with certainty. "These signatures aren't even close to matching yours. This is clearly unauthorized access to your account." I filed a comprehensive fraud claim right there in her office, providing all the documentation I had about my deployment dates and the unauthorized access to my accounts. We went through every suspicious transaction in detail, and she helped me remove my parents from all of my accounts immediately. I changed every password, security question, and PIN associated with any of my financial accounts. The banker even helped me set up fraud alerts on my credit reports and assisted me in freezing my credit entirely so that nobody could open new accounts in my name without my explicit knowledge and consent. Then I drove back to my parents' house knowing this would probably be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. They were all home when I arrived, my parents and Victoria, who was still moving carefully due to her recent surgery. Victoria looked smugly satisfied despite being visibly uncomfortable, like she thought she had gotten away with something. "We need to talk," I said when my dad opened the door. There was something in my tone that made it clear this wasn't going to be a casual family chat. They sat me down in the living room and immediately started launching into more of the same excuses they'd given me the day before. How they had gotten the dates mixed up somehow, how terribly sorry they were about missing the ceremony, and how they absolutely would have been there if they had only known the correct information. I cut them off mid-sentence and placed the bank statements on the coffee table in front of them. "Explain this," I said simply, watching their faces as they realized what they were looking at. My mom went completely pale, the color draining from her face as she recognized what the papers meant. My dad looked confused at first, then increasingly angry, as he began to understand the scope of what had happened. Victoria, however, didn't even try to deny what she had done or show any remorse for her actions. "You weren't using that money anyway," she said, with the kind of casual entitlement that had characterized her behavior throughout our entire lives. "You were off playing soldier while I was dealing with real-life problems here at home. I needed that money more than you did." Playing soldier? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The casual dismissal of my military service, the complete lack of understanding about what I had been through, was almost more infuriating than the theft itself. "I was getting shot at in Afghanistan while you were deciding your butt wasn't good enough." She actually smirked at my response, completely unbothered by my anger or the seriousness of what she had done. "Well, I deserved a better rear end. You already get free housing and meals in the army. What do you need money for anyway?" My parents finally began to understand the full scope of what had happened, and the reality started to sink in. "Victoria," my mom said slowly, her voice filled with growing horror, "what exactly did you do?" "Oh, please." Victoria rolled her eyes like we were all being completely unreasonable about a minor inconvenience. "It's not like Marcus even needs all that money. He gets everything for free in the army anyway. Free food, free housing, free everything. What does he need savings for?" My dad finally spoke up, his voice shaking with a combination of anger and disbelief. Did you actually take money from your brother's account? Money he earned while deployed in a combat zone? So what if I did?" Victoria snapped back, her facade of innocence completely dropping. "He's fine. Look at him. He's perfectly healthy and safe. Meanwhile, I've been stuck here, dealing with real problems. Brandon's been being a complete jerk about my surgery, even threatening to divorce me over it. Because you stole from me," I yelled, my voice echoing through the house. "Your husband found out you took my combat pay without permission. That's exactly why he wouldn't take you to the surgery or support your decision." My parents looked back and forth between Victoria and me, finally starting to understand the full picture of what had transpired. The pieces were falling into place, and they were beginning to realize just how badly they had been manipulated. "And the homecoming date," I continued, not willing to let any part of this go unaddressed. "You lied about that too, didn't you? You knew exactly when I was coming home from Afghanistan." Victoria's face said absolutely everything. The guilt, the calculation, the complete lack of remorse. It was all written clearly across her expression. My mom started crying, finally understanding how deeply she had been deceived and manipulated by her own daughter. My dad just looked completely broken, like his entire understanding of his family had been shattered in the span of a few minutes. "I'm done," I said, standing up from the couch with a finality that surprised even me. "I've already reported the fraud to the bank, and they'll be contacting you about the unauthorized withdrawals. I'm taking back what's mine, and then I'm out of here for good." As I was walking toward the door to leave their house forever, my dad tried desperately to stop me. "Marcus, please. We didn't know about any of this. We would never have allowed her to take your money if we had known what she was doing." "Save it," I said without turning around to look at him. "You've always chosen her. Every single time. Well, now you've got her all to yourself. I hope it's worth everything you've lost." I walked out of that house and didn't look back, even as I heard their voices continuing behind me, still making excuses and trying to process what had just happened. You know that moment when something inside you just fundamentally snaps? Like you've been bending and accommodating and compromising for years, and suddenly you realize you can't bend anymore without breaking completely? That's exactly what happened to me in that moment. I walked out of my parents' house that day and made a conscious decision that I was completely done with all of them. Not just angry or upset, not just taking a temporary break to cool off. I was done. Finished. I had given these people chances my entire life, accepted being second best, accepted being the afterthought whose achievements didn't matter and whose needs came last. But this level of betrayal was too far, even for a family that had never truly valued me. Over the next few days, I went absolutely scorched earth on every connection I had with my family. First, the bank froze all of Victoria's accounts during their fraud investigation, which meant she suddenly couldn't access any of her money while they sorted out the unauthorized transactions. Then I found out that Brandon had apparently reached his breaking point as well and had filed for divorce. Lily called to let me know that he had moved out of their house and was staying with his brother while the legal proceedings got started. He said this was the absolute last straw, Lily explained during our phone conversation. Stealing from a deployed soldier, especially her own brother who was serving in a combat zone, he told me he's completely done with her after this. Meanwhile, I was systematically cutting every single tie that connected me to my family. I changed all of my passwords on every account, closed any joint accounts we had shared, and removed myself from every family plan they had put me on over the years. My parents' cell phones, which I had been paying for as a gesture of goodwill, were suddenly cut off. The streaming services they had been using under my accounts disappeared overnight. The credit card I had let them use for what they claimed were emergencies got canceled immediately. I didn't do any of this to be petty or vindictive. I did it because I desperately needed clean breaks from all of them. No more financial leeching, no more taking me for granted, no more treating me like their backup plan or their personal ATM when they needed something. It was time for them to realize that I wasn't going to be their safety net anymore, and that actions have real consequences. They noticed the changes very quickly. My mom started calling the motel constantly, and then my new phone number once I finally gave it to her. "Marcus, please," she begged during one of these calls, her voice filled with desperation. "We had absolutely no idea that Victoria took your money. We would never have allowed that to happen if we had known what she was doing." "And you never thought to check the original paperwork?" I asked her pointedly. "The official papers about my homecoming were sent directly to you, not to Victoria. Did you even bother to read them? Or did you just let Victoria handle everything like you always do?" She didn't have any answer for that question because we both knew the truth. My dad tried a completely different approach to try to repair our relationship. He came by my apartment looking significantly older than I remembered, with new lines around his eyes and a weariness that seemed to have settled into his bones. "Son, I know we messed up badly," he said, standing awkwardly in my doorway. "But cutting us off completely isn't the answer to this situation. We're still your family, regardless of what's happened." Family? I actually laughed at the word, and it came out harsher than I intended. Family shows up when it matters. Family doesn't let the golden child steal thousands of dollars from their deployed son. Family reads the official paperwork telling them when their son is coming home from a war zone instead of just letting their daughter handle everything. He just stood there taking everything I said, absorbing my anger without trying to defend himself or make excuses. For once in his life, he didn't have any ready justifications for Victoria's behavior or explanations for why I should just accept being treated poorly. "She's always been like this," he finally admitted, and it was probably the first completely honest thing I'd heard from either of my parents in years. We made it too easy for her to get away with this kind of behavior. We enabled her, and now we're seeing what that approach created. It was a moment of genuine honesty that caught me off guard, but it was also far too little and much too late to change anything. Meanwhile, Victoria was apparently on an absolute rampage about the consequences of her actions. When her bank accounts got frozen during the fraud investigation, she went completely ballistic and started calling everyone in our extended family. She was telling them that I was destroying the family over what she called a little mix-up, and that I was being selfish and overly dramatic about the whole situation. But here's the thing about being a lying thief. Eventually, people stop believing your version of events, especially when the bank confirms that you actually committed fraud against your own brother while he was deployed in a combat zone. Victoria's reputation for manipulation and self-centeredness wasn't exactly a secret among our relatives, and most of them could see right through her attempts to paint herself as the victim. I didn't respond to any of her increasingly desperate messages or pick up when she called my new phone number. I just let her dig her own grave deeper and deeper with her lies and manipulation. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't playing her game or trying to manage her emotions or clean up her messes. My buddy Chen from my deployment came to stay with me for about a week while he was between living situations. He'd been discharged early with a medical condition and was trying to figure out his next steps. Having him there helped tremendously. It was good to have someone around who understood what I'd been through overseas, someone who didn't need to have the experience explained or justified to them. "You did the right thing, man," he told me one night, while we were playing video games and just trying to decompress. Some people don't deserve second chances, especially when they've had years to prove they can change and consistently chosen not to. I wasn't entirely sure if that was true when it came to my parents. Maybe they did deserve another shot at being decent family members, but right then I couldn't see past the betrayal. The empty hangar, the stolen money, the years of being treated as second best, it was all too fresh and too painful. So I stayed the course, maintaining complete radio silence and full no contact with all of them. I focused entirely on getting my own life in order and moving forward. About a month after I had returned home, things had mostly settled into what felt like a new normal for me. I was working at my buddy's construction company, learning skills that felt useful and meaningful. I had my own apartment that was small but clean and entirely mine. I was starting to feel human again, like I was building something that belonged to me rather than constantly trying to fit into someone else's expectations. Then, the desperate phone calls started coming with increasing frequency and urgency. First, it was my mom, and her voice was shaking with barely controlled panic when she called. "Marcus, please, we really need your help," she said, and I could hear genuine desperation underneath her words. "The bank is threatening to take legal action against Victoria for the fraud. They're talking about pressing criminal charges, and we can't afford to hire a lawyer to defend her." I told her in no uncertain terms that this wasn't my problem to solve. Victoria had made her choices, and now she needed to face the consequences of those decisions like an adult. Next, it was my dad calling, and then he escalated to showing up at my apartment unannounced. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands were trembling, and he looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past month. "Son, I hate to ask this, and I know we don't deserve your help after everything that's happened," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we're about to lose the house. The mortgage is 4 months behind and we can't catch up." He went on to explain that he had lost his job when his company downsized their workforce, and my mother's hours at work had been significantly cut back. They were facing foreclosure and had nowhere else to turn for help. "What about Victoria?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. "Can't she help you out financially?" He looked down at his feet, clearly ashamed of what he was about to tell me. "Victoria moved in with some friend of hers. She's not speaking to us anymore, and she says it's our fault for not defending her against your accusations. So I'm the backup plan," I said, and it wasn't really a question. Again, "No, that's not—" He started to protest, but I cut him off. "It is exactly that. It's always been like that. I'm only considered family when you need something from me." He left my apartment with nothing, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I closed the door behind him and tried to ignore the guilt that was starting to creep in around the edges of my anger. They had made their bed, and now they were going to have to lie in it. I kept telling myself that this wasn't my responsibility, that I didn't owe them anything after what they had done to me. A week later, my mom called again, and this time her desperation was even more pronounced and heartbreaking. "We're being evicted, Marcus. We have to be out of the house by Thursday." Her voice was barely audible, like she was trying not to let the neighbors hear her admitting to this level of failure. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be furious with all of us, but please, we have nowhere to go." I hung up the phone without giving her an answer, still not ready to forgive or help them after everything they had put me through. Thursday came and went, and I figured they had somehow found somewhere to stay, maybe with relatives or friends who were willing to help them during this crisis. Then on Saturday, I received a call from an unknown number that I almost didn't answer. It was my mom calling from a payphone, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "We're staying at the roadside inn," she said, and I could hear the shame and desperation in every word. "Room 142. They only let us pay for 3 nights because that's all we could afford, and after that, I honestly don't know what we're going to do." The pain in her voice was unmistakably real, and it cut through my anger in a way that surprised me. I didn't respond immediately, just listened to her breathing on the other end of the line. "I'm not asking you for money," she continued, and there was a dignity in her voice despite the desperate circumstances. "I wouldn't do that to you again after everything that's happened. I wanted you to know where we are, in case—" in case you wanted to say goodbye before we leave town permanently. She went on to explain that my father had found a possible job opportunity 4 states away, and they were planning to move there and live in his cousin's garage until they could get back on their feet financially. It would mean starting over completely, leaving behind everything they had built in this town. After I hung up the phone, I sat on my couch for a very long time, thinking about everything that had happened between us. I thought about that empty homecoming ceremony, the stolen money, and all the years of being treated as second best. But I also thought about what kind of person I wanted to be and whether I could live with myself if I let them become homeless and destitute. I spent that entire night awake, wrestling with my conscience and trying to figure out what the right thing to do was in this impossible situation. The next day, I drove to the roadside inn and knocked on the door of room 142. When my mom answered, her eyes went wide with shock at seeing me standing there. She clearly hadn't expected me to show up, especially not after our last conversation. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "You came." Behind her, I could see my dad sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at some papers that were probably related to their financial situation. The room was tiny and depressing, reeking of cigarettes and despair from years of housing people in desperate situations. All of their belongings were packed into garbage bags and old suitcases, a heartbreaking testament to how far they had fallen. They had really lost everything. "I'm not giving you money," I said immediately, wanting to establish clear boundaries before this conversation went any further. "That's not why I'm here." "We understand," my dad said, standing up from the bed and looking at me with a mixture of gratitude and shame. "We're just grateful that you came to see us at all." I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to propose would change everything between us, but also knowing that I couldn't live with myself if I just walked away completely. "I have some conditions," I said firmly. "They're non-negotiable, and if you can't agree to all of them, then this conversation ends right here." They both nodded eagerly, clearly desperate enough to agree to almost anything. "First, I'm not paying any of your existing debts. Those are yours to deal with, and you'll have to figure out payment plans or whatever you need to do to handle them. Second, I own a small rental property on the east side of town. It's not much, it needs a lot of work, and it's not in the best neighborhood, but you can stay there. However, you'll pay all utilities and handle all maintenance yourselves. Third, my dad. There's an opening at my construction company. It's hard physical work. The pay is low to start, but it's steady employment if you're willing to work for it." They looked at each other, then back at me, clearly trying to process this unexpected offer. "Fourth, and this is the most important condition," I continued, my voice becoming harder. "No contact with Victoria whatsoever until she makes this right. No helping her, no enabling her behavior, no giving her money or support of any kind. She pays back every penny she stole from me, or she's not part of this arrangement at all." "What exactly are you offering us?" my dad asked carefully, wanting to make sure he understood the full scope of what I was proposing. "A chance to start over," I said simply. "On my terms, with my rules. You work, you pay your own way, and you learn to stand on your own 2 feet without anyone else's help. And maybe, eventually, we can rebuild some kind of relationship, but it will never be like it was before. Ever." My mom started crying, but these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief and gratitude. My dad just nodded slowly, a mixture of shame and genuine appreciation evident on his face. "Why?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible. "After everything that's happened, after all the ways we've failed you, why would you help us at all?" I thought about that question for a long moment, reflecting on that empty homecoming ceremony and the long, silent walk across the hangar floor with nobody cheering for me. The silence that still echoed in my nightmares and probably always would. "Because I don't want to be like you," I said simply, and the words carried more weight than any anger or accusations could have. "I don't want to be the kind of person who leaves family behind when they need help, even when that family has hurt me deeply." They couldn't say anything in response to that. The truth of it hung in the air between us, acknowledging both their failures and my choice to be better than those failures. They moved into the rental property the very next day, and my dad started work at the construction company the day after that. My mom found a part-time job at a local grocery store within the week. Most importantly, they stuck to every single one of my conditions without complaint or attempts to negotiate. No handouts, no free rides, no special treatment, just a chance to prove they could change and rebuild their lives through their own effort and hard work. I heard through the grapevine that Victoria's cosmetic surgery procedure had gotten infected, which required additional medical treatment and expenses. Brandon had pushed through their divorce proceedings as quickly as possible, wanting to be completely free of her, and her destructive behavior. When Victoria tried coming back to our parents after her friend kicked her out of the apartment, they actually stood firm for once in their lives and refused to help her. They told her she needed to make things right with me before they would consider having any relationship with her. My parents have genuinely surprised me with their commitment to change. They've actually stuck to our arrangement and followed through on their promises. My dad is still working at the construction company and got promoted to crew leader last month based on his work ethic and reliability. My mom is now working full-time at the grocery store and has been accepted into their management training program. They pay all their bills on time. They call when they say they will, and they remember important dates now. The rental house is starting to look decent after months of my dad working on improvements during his weekends. He's painted the entire interior, repaired the deck, and even put in a small garden that my mom had mentioned wanting. They're talking about trying to buy the property from me next year, and I told them we could work something out if they continue to prove themselves responsible. Last month, they invited me over for dinner at the rental house, and it was the first time we'd shared a meal together since I'd returned from deployment. My dad brought up my upcoming promotion ceremony to staff sergeant, which genuinely surprised me because he had actually remembered something important about my military career without being reminded multiple times. My mom asked if they could attend the ceremony, and after thinking about it for a moment, I agreed to let them come. My dad promised me they wouldn't miss it this time, and he said he had already taken the day off work and put the date on 4 different calendars to make absolutely sure there would be no confusion or conflicts. Such a small gesture, but it meant everything to me given our history. And speaking of meaningful relationships, remember Lily? We've kept in touch regularly ever since everything went down with my family. At first, it was just occasional text messages checking in on how I was doing and making sure I was handling everything okay. Then those texts gradually turned into grabbing coffee together when she was in town for work. Eventually, those coffee meetings turned into actual dinner dates, and those dinners turned into spending entire weekends together. I honestly never saw it coming. She was just this person who had done the right thing when absolutely everyone else in my life was doing the wrong thing. She had sent me that thoughtful care package when my own family couldn't be bothered. And she had the courage to tell me the truth about Victoria's lies and theft when it would have been easier to stay out of our family drama. But somewhere along the way, I started looking forward to her messages more than anything else in my day. I found myself thinking about her during quiet moments at work, and I realized that she represented something I'd never experienced before. Someone who saw me as worth paying attention to, worth caring about. A couple of months ago, she moved to my city for a better job opportunity, and we've been officially dating for 5 months now. It's still relatively new, and we're still figuring out what this relationship means and where it might go, but I can honestly say it feels right in a way that nothing has ever felt before in my life. She also took me to meet her parents, and I was incredibly nervous about that introduction. They knew the entire story. Not just my side of what had happened, but everything that had gone down with Brandon and Victoria's marriage as well. I was genuinely worried they would think I was this toxic person who had cut off his entire family over money, or that they would see me as someone who brought drama and conflict wherever he went. Instead, her father shook my hand firmly when we met and said, "We've heard a lot about you, Marcus. Thank you for your service to our country." Then he showed me his den, where he had pictures and memorabilia from his own time serving in the Navy during Vietnam. We spent 3 hours in that room just talking about military life, deployment experiences, and the challenges of transitioning back to civilian life. Her mom made this absolutely incredible dinner and asked me genuine questions about myself, actual questions where she listened carefully to my answers and followed up with thoughtful responses. It hit me halfway through dessert that this was what a real family was supposed to feel like. These were people who made space for me in their lives, who saw me as an individual worth getting to know, who cared about my thoughts and experiences. Lily and I drove back to the city that night, and I was quiet for most of the drive, just processing what I had experienced. She asked if I was okay, and I told her, "I'm just thinking about how different families can be." She reached over and took my hand without saying anything, just held on while I worked through my thoughts and emotions. She understood that I needed to process this new experience of what healthy family relationships actually looked like. As for Victoria, the bank ultimately decided not to press criminal charges against her. According to Lily, it was something about not wanting the negative publicity that would come from prosecuting a veteran's sister, even though the theft was clearly documented and provable. But they did recover most of the money she had stolen from my accounts and returned it to me. Karma has a funny way of catching up with people, though. Remember that infection from her cosmetic surgery procedure? It turns out it never fully healed properly, which created ongoing complications that required multiple additional medical procedures. These follow-up treatments drained what little savings she had left after her divorce settlement, and the mounting medical bills became a serious financial burden. The new boyfriend she had moved in with after leaving our parents' house decided to bail when her medical bills started piling up, and it became clear she was going to be expensive to maintain. According to Lily, who still hears updates through Brandon's social circle, Victoria eventually lost her job after missing too many days for medical appointments and follow-up procedures. Without steady income, she couldn't make rent and got evicted from the apartment. 4 days ago, Victoria showed up at my apartment completely unannounced. She didn't call first or ask if it was a good time. She just appeared at my door looking nothing like the confident, self-assured sister I remembered from our childhood. Her hair was unwashed and looked like it hadn't been professionally styled in months. Her clothes were worn out and clearly hadn't been replaced in a long time. She had dark circles under her eyes and an overall appearance that suggested she hadn't been taking good care of herself. For a brief moment, I almost didn't recognize her. This was not the polished, put-together golden child who had always been the center of attention in our family. "Marcus," she said, trying to sound casual but with this desperate edge creeping into her voice that she couldn't quite hide. "It's been a while since we've talked." I just stood there in my doorway, not inviting her inside, waiting to see what game she was planning to play this time. I had learned not to trust anything about her motivations or intentions. "So, I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, picking nervously at her fingernails in a way that suggested she was more anxious than she was trying to let on. "About everything that happened between us. All the misunderstandings and conflicts we've had." I remained silent, letting her continue with whatever speech she had prepared. "I think it's time we put all of this behind us," she said, trying to sound reasonable and mature. "You know, reconcile like you did with Mom and Dad. Family is family, after all, and we should stick together through difficult times." I almost laughed at the transparent manipulation in her words. "Is that right?" I said, keeping my voice completely neutral. "Yeah, absolutely. You know, family is the most important thing in life. We should support each other and move past these old disagreements." She was trying to sound sincere, but I could hear the calculation behind every word. Then came the real reason for her sudden desire to reconnect and rebuild our relationship. She launched into this sob story about how she was basically homeless, staying on a friend's couch that wasn't going to be available much longer. She needed a temporary loan to get back on her feet financially, and maybe a place to stay for just a week or two while she figured out her next steps. "What happened to all that money from your cosmetic surgery?" I asked pointedly. "You know, the money you stole from me while I was deployed in Afghanistan?" Her face immediately hardened, and the fake concerned sister act started to crack around the edges. "Are you seriously still hung up on that? It's been months since that happened. I thought you would have moved past it by now." "Funny thing about theft," I replied calmly. "The amount of time that passes doesn't change what it was or make it acceptable." She switched tactics immediately, and suddenly her eyes were welling up with what appeared to be genuine tears. It was a performance I had seen countless times throughout our childhood. The practiced vulnerability that had always worked on our parents. "I have nowhere to go, Marcus. I've lost everything. I made a mistake, okay? People make mistakes all the time. Surely you can understand that and find it in your heart to forgive me." "They do make mistakes," I agreed with her. "And then they face the consequences of those mistakes. Mom and Dad earned their second chance by admitting what they had done wrong and working actively to change their behavior. They didn't show up at my door demanding help when they hit rock bottom. They were prepared to sleep in their car and start over with nothing. So what? I have to sleep in my car too? Is that what you want from me?" she asked, her voice rising with indignation. I shook my head. "What I want doesn't matter in this situation. What matters is that you still don't understand what you did wrong. You're not here because you're genuinely sorry or because you want to make amends for your actions. You're here because you need something from me again. Just like always." "Fine," she snapped, and the fake tears disappeared instantly like someone had flipped a switch. "I thought you might have grown up and matured a little bit, but you're still the same petty, jealous brother who couldn't handle not being the favorite child." I actually smiled at that comment because it showed me that she still fundamentally didn't understand anything about what had happened or what she had done wrong. "See, that's where you're completely wrong about me," I said calmly. "I'm not the same guy who came back from deployment broken and desperate for approval. That guy might have given in to your manipulation. That guy might have tried to buy your love and acceptance by helping you out of this situation." I paused, looking at her carefully to make sure she understood what I was about to say. The man I am now understands what real family relationships actually look like. I've learned what it means to have people in my life who care about me for who I am, not what I can do for them. And this, I gestured between the two of us, this isn't it. This isn't what real family looks like. I closed the door firmly as she started to launch into another angry tirade about how unfair I was being. I didn't slam it. There was no anger or drama in the gesture. I just shut it with finality while her voice continued on the other side, muffled through the door, for about a minute before I heard her footsteps stomping away down the hallway. Lily came out of the bedroom where she had been giving us space to have our conversation privately. "You okay?" she asked, wrapping her arms around me from behind in a gesture of support and comfort. "Yeah," I said, and I genuinely meant it. "Actually, I'm really good." The old me would have felt guilty about turning her away, I continued, reflecting on how much I had changed since returning from deployment. The old me would have worried about Victoria and what might happen to her. The old me would have maybe even given in and helped her despite everything she had done. But that guy walked across an empty hangar floor with nobody cheering for him and learned the hard way what family really means, I said. He learned the difference between people who love you and people who use you. Lily squeezed me tighter, understanding the significance of what had just happened and what it represented in terms of my personal growth and healing. Thanks for all the comments and messages, everyone. I honestly didn't expect this story to blow up like it did when I first posted it. For those who have been asking about my parents and the promotion ceremony I mentioned, yes, they showed up on time and even had a small celebration planned afterwards. They're taking baby steps, but they're meaningful ones, and I'm starting to see real change in how they treat me and our relationship.